The diamond ring glittered in Nomonde's trembling hand as security guards surrounded her inside the luxury jewelry showroom. Her dress was torn, her sandals dusty, and her eyes filled with tears as rich customers whispered, "Thief." Across the room, billionaire Temitope Adewale stood frozen, watching the poor orphan girl being judged before she could even speak. But what none of them knew was that this ring carried a secret powerful enough to destroy, lies expose betrayal, and bring Nomonde to tears for a reason no one expected. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from and your local time. And if stories of kindness, justice, and hope touch your heart, please subscribe. Before sunrise touched the crowded streets of Lagos, Nomonde was already awake. She opened her eyes slowly on the thin mat spread across the concrete floor of her tiny rented space behind a food stall. Outside the city was already breathing with noise. Bus conductors shouted for passengers. Pots clanged against metal sinks. Motorcycle engines growled through narrow streets. Somewhere nearby, a baby cried while a radio played an old gospel song through static. Nomonde sat up quietly and pressed a hand against her stomach. Hunger again. At 21 years old, she had learned not to complain about it. Hunger was like heat in Lagos, always present, always pressing itself against the body, whether invited or not. She folded her mat neatly before tying a faded scarf over her natural hair. Her yellow dress had grown pale after years of washing. The hem was torn in two places and carefully stitched back together with black thread. Her sandals were worn so thin that sharp stones sometimes cut the bottom of her feet while she walked. Near her sleeping mat sat a small metal bowl containing 3 coins and an old photograph wrapped in nylon. Nomonde picked up the picture gently. Her mother smiled back at her from the faded image, holding a younger Nomonde in her arms. That photograph was the only thing she still owned from her family. "I'll try again today, Mama," she whispered softly. Her parents had died years earlier, leaving her in the care of relatives who never truly wanted her. She grew up moving from one crowded house to another until finally being pushed out completely. Since then, Lagos had become both her home and her battlefield. By 6 in the morning, she was already walking toward Balogun Market. The market stretched endlessly beneath the growing sunlight. Women arranged tomatoes into neat piles. Men pushed carts loaded with rice sacks through crowded pathways. The smell of fried akara mixed with diesel smoke, pepper sweat, and dust. "Nomonde," a familiar voice shouted. She turned immediately. Auntie Bimpe stood beside her vegetable stall with both hands on her hips. "You came late today," the older woman complained. "The sun is barely up," Nomonde replied with a tired smile. "The sun has money. You don't. Carry those baskets." Nomonde laughed softly and obeyed. For the next several hours she worked without rest. She arranged vegetables, swept dirty walkways, carried baskets for traders, and unloaded bags of onions from delivery trucks. Sweat soaked her dress beneath the heavy afternoon heat, but she continued moving because every small task meant another coin. Nomonde survived that way every day, one small job at a time. Despite everything life had taken from her, she remained strangely gentle. That was what people noticed most about her. She still smiled at rude customers. She still greeted elderly traders respectfully. She still helped strangers even when she barely had enough strength for herself. Some people admired her kindness. Others thought it made her foolish. By noon, The Lagos heat became unbearable. Hot air trapped itself beneath the metal roofs above the market stalls, making breathing feel heavy. Nomonde finally sat behind Auntie Bimpe's stall and rubbed her aching wrists. "You haven't eaten, have you?" Auntie Bimpe asked suddenly. Nomonde avoided her eyes. "That means no," the older woman muttered. Without another word, Auntie Bimpe handed her a small wrap of rice and stew. "Take it before you faint and embarrass me in front of customers." Nomonde's face softened immediately. "Thank you, Auntie." "Yes, yes. Go and eat." Nomonde carried the food toward a quieter corner beside an old cracked wall. The smell alone made her stomach tighten painfully. She had not eaten properly since the previous afternoon. She sat carefully on an overturned wooden crate and opened the nylon slowly. Then she heard coughing nearby. Nomonde looked up. An elderly woman stood near the gutter holding a crooked walking stick. Her faded wrapper hung loosely from her thin body, and exhaustion covered her face. She moved weakly from stall to stall while people ignored her completely. One young man laughed as he passed her. A trader waved her away before she could even speak. The old woman coughed again and nearly lost her balance. Nomonde looked down at the food in her lap, then back at the woman. Her stomach begged her not to move. That rice might be the only meal she would eat all day. But after a long moment, Nomonde stood up anyway. "Mama," she called gently. The old woman turned with surprise in her tired eyes. "Please sit here," Nomonde said, guiding her toward the crate. "My daughter," the woman said weakly, "I don't have money." Nomonde shook her head. "I'm not asking for money." She placed the warm rice carefully into the woman's trembling hands. The woman stared down at it silently. "What about you?" she asked. "I already ate," Nomonde lied softly. The old woman looked at her for a long moment before slowly beginning to eat. Tears gathered in her eyes after the first few bites. Nomonde pretended not to notice. "What is your name?" the woman asked quietly. "Nomonde." "That name carries dignity," the woman murmured. Nomonde smiled faintly. "My mother gave it to me." The woman nodded slowly. "Your mother raised a good heart." Those words struck something deep inside Nomonde. Nobody had spoken about her mother in years. The old woman finished eating carefully before folding the empty nylon in her hands. "My name is Mama Acey," she said. "I come to this market sometimes." "You should come earlier," Nomonde replied kindly. "The afternoon heat is too strong." Mama Acey studied her face quietly. "You are hungry too," she said. Nomonde quickly shook her head, but the old woman seemed unconvinced. Instead of arguing, Mama Acey reached into a small cloth pouch tied around her waist and removed a thin woven bracelet made of faded red and brown thread. She tied it gently around Nomonde's wrist. Nomonde looked surprised. "Mama, I can't take this." "It is not payment," Mama Acey replied softly. "It is a blessing." Nomonde stared silently at the bracelet. "When life becomes cruel," Mama Acey continued, "remember that kindness is never wasted." Before Nomonde could answer, Auntie Bimpe shouted loudly across the market. "Nomonde, if you finish saving the whole city, come back and work." Nomonde laughed softly and stood. "I have to go." Mama Acey nodded slowly. "Go, my daughter." The rest of the day passed beneath the heavy Lagos heat. Nomonde continued carrying baskets and helping traders until evening finally arrived. Her body ached with exhaustion, and hunger still lingered painfully inside her stomach. But she kept thinking about Mama Essie's words. As the sun began setting behind the crowded streets, Nomonde counted the small coins she had earned that day. Barely enough for bread. Auntie Bimpe watched her quietly. "You gave away your only food," the older woman said. Nomonde tied the coins carefully into her cloth purse. She needed it more. Auntie Bimpe shook her head slowly. "One day, this world will hurt you for being too soft." Nomonde looked toward the busy street ahead of her. "Maybe," she said quietly, "but I don't want suffering to change who I am." Then she began walking home beneath the orange Lagos sky, unaware that before another day ended, her honesty would place her directly in the path of a missing diamond ring, a powerful billionaire, and a secret capable of changing her life forever. The next morning, Nomonde woke before dawn with the same hunger pressing against her stomach and the same uncertainty waiting outside her door. But something felt different. Perhaps it was the woven bracelet still resting around her wrist. Or perhaps it was the memory of Mama Essie's voice telling her that kindness was never wasted. Whatever it was, Nomonde carried the feeling quietly as she prepared for another difficult day. The streets of Lagos were already crowded by the time she reached Balogun Market. Drivers leaned on their horns impatiently while traders arranged goods beneath colorful umbrellas. The humid morning air carried the smell of fried plantain dust, engine smoke, and fresh pepper. "Nomonde," Auntie Bimpe shouted the moment she saw her. "Today, you will help me unload tomatoes before customers destroy my blood pressure." Nomonde smiled softly. "Good morning to you too, Auntie. Morning will not pay my rent. Move faster." Nomonde laughed quietly and began working. The hours passed the same way they always did. She carried baskets from delivery vans, cleaned dirty pathways, and helped customers bargain with traders who pretended not to understand simple math whenever foreigners visited the market. By late morning, sweat covered her face and neck. Her arms felt heavy from lifting crates since sunrise. Auntie Bimpe handed her a small bottle of water. "You'll collapse one day if you keep working like a machine." Nomonde accepted it gratefully. "Thank you." The older woman narrowed her eyes at her. "Go deliver these peppers to the woman near Victoria Plaza before afternoon traffic starts." Nomonde nodded immediately. Victoria Plaza sat several streets away from the market, surrounded by expensive shops and modern glass buildings that looked completely different from the crowded chaos where Nomonde spent most of her life. Wealth moved differently there. The roads were cleaner. Security guards stood straighter. Even the air felt quieter. Nomonde balanced the basket of peppers carefully on her head as she walked. As she approached the plaza entrance, she noticed several luxury cars parked outside. Well-dressed men and women stepped through large glass doors while security guards opened them respectfully. Nomonde lowered her eyes and continued walking. Places like that reminded her too much of the invisible wall between rich people and people like her. The poor cleaned those buildings, carried deliveries into them, and stood outside admiring them but rarely belonged inside. She delivered the peppers quickly and began walking back toward the street when something caught her attention near the edge of the pavement. A small velvet box. Nomonde slowed her steps. At first, she assumed it was empty packaging thrown away carelessly by a customer. But something about it seemed expensive, clean, deliberately placed. She looked around. People continued moving past her without noticing it. Slowly, Nomonde bent down and picked it up. The velvet felt soft beneath her fingers. A strange feeling settled inside her chest. Carefully, she opened it. Her breath caught instantly. Inside the box rested a diamond ring so beautiful that for a moment Nomonde forgot how to breathe. The stone reflected sunlight in sharp flashes, sending tiny lights across her face. She had never held anything so expensive before. Even without understanding jewelry, she knew immediately that this ring was worth more money than she could imagine. Her hands trembled. For several seconds, she simply stared at it in disbelief while the noise of Legos continued around her. Then reality struck her all at once. Someone must be searching for this ring. Someone rich. Someone powerful. Nomonde closed the box quickly and looked around again. Nobody seemed to notice her. A dangerous thought slipped quietly into her mind. Sell it. The thought frightened her because it arrived so naturally. That ring could change everything. She could rent a better room, eat properly every day, start a small business, buy new clothes, escape the endless exhaustion that ruled her life. One ring, one decision. Her fingers tightened around the velvet box. For the first time in years, temptation stood directly in front of her. Nomonde swallowed hard and continued walking back toward the market, but the box suddenly felt heavy in her hands. By the time she returned, Auntie Bimpe immediately noticed her troubled face. "What happened?" the older woman asked. "Nothing." That answer always means something. Nomonde hesitated before carefully pulling the velvet box from her bag. Auntie Bimpe's eyes widened immediately. "Where did you get that?" "I found it near Victoria Plaza." The older woman grabbed the box, carefully opened it, and nearly gasped. "Nomonde," she whispered. "Do you know how much this is worth?" Nomonde shook her head slowly. "More money than you and I may see in 10 lifetimes. Nomonde looked down quietly. Auntie Bimpe stared at the ring again, her expression changing slowly from shock to calculation. "If nobody saw you pick it up," she began carefully. Nomonde looked at her immediately. "I'm only speaking truth," Auntie Bimpe continued. "People lose things every day in Lagos, rich people especially. Most of them will not even suffer from it." Nomonde remained silent. "You could sell this," the older woman whispered, quietly. "Leave this market forever. Start a better life." The words struck directly against the deepest parts of Nomonde's exhaustion. A better life. For a moment she imagined it clearly. Sleeping without hunger, owning clothes without holes, walking through a market without worrying whether she could afford food. Tears almost rose into her eyes from how badly she wanted that life. But then another thought entered her mind. What if the owner was suffering too? What if the ring mattered for reasons beyond money? Nomonde remembered the pain in Mama Essie's eyes while eating that small portion of rice. She remembered her mother teaching her as a child that poverty should never become an excuse for dishonesty. Slowly, she closed the velvet box. "No," she said quietly. Auntie Bimpe frowned. "No. It belongs to someone." "And what belongs to you, Nomonde?" the older woman asked sharply. Hunger, suffering. This city has shown you no mercy. Nomonde lowered her gaze. Maybe not, she admitted softly. But if I sell it, I will become someone my mother would not recognize. Silence settled between them. Finally, Auntie Bimpe sighed deeply and handed the box back to her. You are either very good, she muttered, or very foolish. Maybe both. The older woman shook her head slowly. So what now? Nomonde stared toward the direction of Victoria Plaza. I'll return it. Fear immediately tightened inside her stomach after speaking the words aloud. Returning the ring meant walking into a world where people like her were usually treated with suspicion before speaking. One look at her torn dress and worn sandals would be enough for security guards to assume the worst. Still, she knew what she had to do. That evening, Nomonde sat alone in her tiny rented space, holding the velvet box carefully in her lap. Outside Lagos remained loud and restless, but inside the small room, silence surrounded her thoughts. She opened the box one last time. The diamond reflected light across the dark walls. For a brief moment, she allowed herself to imagine the life that ring could have bought her. Then slowly, she closed it again. The decision was made. Tomorrow, she would return it. She did not know that the owner of the ring was billionaire Temitope Adewale. She did not know the ring carried painful family secrets, or that powerful people were already searching desperately for it. Most dangerously of all, she did not know that her honesty was about to lead her directly into humiliation, false accusations, and a truth capable of changing her entire life forever. At the exact moment, Nomonde sat alone in her tiny rented room, holding the diamond ring beneath the weak glow of a hanging bulb. Another world across Lagos was already searching desperately for it. Inside the top floor of Adewale Holdings Tower, silence filled a luxurious office lined with glass walls and dark wooden shelves. Expensive paintings hung beneath soft, golden lighting. The city skyline stretched endlessly beyond the windows glowing beneath the evening sky. Yet despite the beauty surrounding him, Temitope Adewale looked like a man carrying invisible weight on his shoulders. The billionaire stood near the window with one hand in his pocket, while the other rested against the glass. At 42 years old, he was one of the most respected businessmen in Nigeria. His companies owned hotels, shipping lines, construction firms, and luxury properties across Africa. Newspapers described him as brilliant, disciplined, and untouchable. But those who worked closely with him knew something else. Temitope carried sadness like a second shadow. "Sir," his assistant said carefully from the doorway, "security has searched the entire plaza again." Temitope did not turn around immediately, and the assistant hesitated. Still nothing. A long silence followed. Finally, Temitope closed his eyes briefly before facing the room again. His dark, tailored suit fit perfectly, but exhaustion still showed beneath his calm appearance. He had barely slept for days. "Who handled the jewelry case after delivery?" he asked quietly. Madame Nkiru inspected it personally before the private presentation this afternoon. At the mention of her name, something cold passed briefly through Temitope's expression. Madame Nkiru Okafor was elegant, intelligent, and deeply connected to influential families across Lagos. Officially, she served on the board of one of his luxury companies. Unofficially, She had spent years trying to move closer into the Adewale family's private affairs. Temitope trusted very few people around her. Still tonight, he was too distracted to focus on suspicion. His attention remained fixed on the missing ring. "It cannot simply disappear," he said softly. "We've reviewed staff movements," the assistant replied. "Security believes someone may have taken it near the plaza entrance before the event began." Temitope's jaw tightened slightly. That ring was not merely expensive jewelry. To the rest of Lagos, it was simply a flawless diamond worth a fortune. But to Temitope, it carried the final promise he had made to his mother before she died. A memory returned sharply to him then. Years earlier, his mother had sat beside him in a hospital bed, her breathing weak from illness. In her trembling hands, she held an older family ring passed down through generations of the Adewale family. "Find your sister," she had whispered. Temitope still remembered the tears in her eyes. His younger sister Zanele had disappeared as a child during a violent period of unrest while visiting relatives far from Lagos. Despite years of searching, no trace of her had ever been found. Their mother carried that grief until her final breath. After her death, Temitope redesigned the family ring into a new diamond setting, promising himself he would one day place it into Zanele's hands if she were ever found alive. Now the ring was gone. And with it came the terrifying feeling that he had failed his family all over again. "Sir," the assistant asked carefully. Temitope slowly returned to the present. "Continue searching," he said quietly. "Every camera, every employee, every entrance." "Yes, sir." The assistant left the office silently. Temitope remained alone beside the window again. Below him, Lagos moved endlessly beneath flashing lights and crowded streets. Millions of people struggling, surviving, and hoping. Somewhere within that enormous city, the ring existed in someone's hands. What he did not know was that those hands belonged to a hungry orphan girl sitting alone in a tiny, rented corner with fear in her eyes. Elsewhere in the city, Madame Nkiru sat inside a luxury restaurant sipping wine while listening to soft live music. Her expensive jewelry sparkled beneath warm lighting, and her calm appearance hid the irritation slowly growing inside her. Across from her sat a tall man wearing a black security uniform jacket. Chinedu, one of the guards assigned to Victoria Plaza. "You are certain nobody saw?" she asked quietly. Chinedu nodded immediately. "I removed the footage from the hallway exactly like you asked." Madame Nkiru's expression relaxed slightly. "And the ring?" "We lost track of it after the confusion near the entrance." Her eyes hardened instantly. "You lost track. There were too many people moving around. Someone may have picked it up." Madame Nkiru set down her wine glass carefully. That ring was never supposed to leave the building. Chinedu lowered his voice nervously. "What if somebody returns it?" For the first time that evening, a faint smile appeared on Madame Nkiru's face. "Then we make certain the wrong person is blamed." Meanwhile, across the city, Nomonde sat on her thin sleeping mat, staring at the velvet box resting beside her. The tiny room felt unusually quiet that night. She had tried to sleep twice already, but each time anxiety forced her eyes open again. Returning the ring tomorrow suddenly felt terrifying. What if people accused her of stealing it? What if security guards refused to listen? What if the owner believed she was lying? Nomonde hugged her knees tightly against her chest. A small voice inside her kept whispering the same dangerous question. Why not keep it? Nobody would know. The thought filled her with guilt immediately. She looked toward the old photograph of her mother resting near the wall. Slowly, Nomonde reached for the woven bracelet Mama Essie had tied around her wrist earlier that day. When life becomes cruel, remember that kindness is never wasted. The old woman's words echoed softly inside her memory. Nomonde closed her eyes. For most of her life, poverty had taken things from her piece by piece: comfort, safety, opportunity, dignity. Sometimes it felt as though the world expected poor people to become dishonest eventually, as though suffering itself pushed them toward wrongdoing. But Nomonde feared becoming cruel more than she feared remaining poor. That was the truth she carried quietly inside herself. Finally, she picked up the velvet box and placed it carefully into her cloth bag. Tomorrow morning, she would go to Victoria Plaza. She would return the ring, even if nobody believed her, even if people judged her before hearing her voice. Outside Lagos continued roaring through the night while expensive cars moved beneath glowing streetlights and market traders prepared for another day of survival. Two completely different worlds were slowly moving toward collision. One belonged to Temi Tope Adewale, a billionaire carrying grief family secrets and power strong enough to influence entire industries. The other belonged to Nomonde, a poor orphan girl with torn clothes, tired eyes, and a heart too honest for her own protection. Neither of them knew how deeply their lives were already connected. And neither of them knew that by tomorrow afternoon, a single diamond ring would pull them into humiliation, betrayal, hidden family truths, and a moment powerful enough to change both their futures forever. Nomonde barely slept that night. Each time she closed her eyes, she saw the diamond ring flashing beneath the weak light of her room. Sometimes she imagined returning it peacefully to its owner. Other times, she imagined security guards accusing her before she could even explain herself. By dawn, fear sat heavily inside her stomach. Still, the decision had already been made. After washing her face with cold water from a plastic bucket, she carefully placed the velvet box into her cloth bag and tied it tightly beneath her scarf. Outside, Lagos was already awake. Buses crowded the roads. Traders shouted prices into the humid morning air. Motorcycle riders pushed dangerously through traffic, while pedestrians squeezed between moving vehicles. The city felt restless, impatient, alive. Nomonde walked through it quietly. She stopped briefly at Balogan Market before heading toward Victoria Plaza. Auntie Bimpe noticed her nervous face immediately. "You look like, someone going to court," the older woman said. Nomonde forced a weak smile. "Maybe it will feel like that." Auntie Bimpe glanced around before lowering her voice. "You still plan to return it?" "Yes." The older woman folded her arms. "And if they accuse you?" Nomonde looked down at her worn sandals. "I'll tell the truth." Auntie Bimpe sighed deeply. "Truth is expensive in places where rich people make the rules." Nomonde said nothing. For a moment, Auntie Bimpe's expression softened slightly. She reached into her stall and handed Nomonde a small bread roll wrapped in paper. "Eat before you go." Nomonde accepted it gratefully. "Thank you." And Nomonde, "Yes, if trouble starts, don't stand there crying quietly. Speak." Nomonde nodded. But deep inside, she already knew fear might silence her when the moment came. Less than an hour later, Victoria Plaza stood before her again. In daylight, the building looked even more intimidating. Tall glass walls reflected sunlight across polished marble steps. Luxury cars lined the entrance while uniformed security guards opened doors for wealthy customers dressed in expensive suits and elegant jewelry. Nomonde slowed her steps. Suddenly, she became painfully aware of everything about herself. Her faded dress, her worn sandals, the loose thread hanging from her sleeve. Even the way people glanced at her while passing by made her feel smaller. She tightened her grip on the cloth bag and continued forward. One of the guards noticed her immediately. "Hey," he said sharply. "Where are you going?" Nomonde stopped. I need to return something." The guard looked her up and down slowly. "Return what?" She hesitated. The second guard stepped closer with suspicion already visible on his face. "You work here?" "No." "Then why are you here?" Nomonde swallowed nervously. "I found something yesterday near the plaza entrance." The guards exchanged a quick glance. "What thing?" Slowly, Nomonde reached into her cloth bag and removed the velvet box. The first guard's eyes widened immediately. "Where did you get that?" he demanded. "I found it outside yesterday," Nomonde explained quickly. "I came to return it." The second guard grabbed the box from her hands before she could react. He opened it, and both men stared at the diamond ring in shock. For one dangerous moment, silence filled the entrance. Then suspicion arrived exactly as Nomonde had feared. "You stole this?" the first guard said coldly. "No," Nomonde answered immediately. "I found it near the road." Convenient story. It's true. Several nearby customers slowed their steps after hearing raised voices. Wealthy women carrying shopping bags turned curiously toward the scene. A man in a gray suit paused near the entrance. The second guard narrowed his eyes at Nomonde. "You expect us to believe someone like you came all the way here just to return a diamond ring?" Nomonde's face flushed with humiliation. "I only wanted to give it back." The first guard laughed quietly. "These poor girls become creative every day." Nomonde felt every pair of eyes settling onto her torn clothes. People had already decided who she was before hearing her full sentence. "I'm telling the truth," she whispered. The second guard stepped closer. "Maybe you should explain that to management upstairs." Fear immediately tightened inside her chest. "I don't want trouble," Nomonde said softly. "Too late for that." One guard motioned toward the glass doors. "Move." Nomonde hesitated before slowly walking inside. The cold air conditioning struck her skin instantly. Everything inside Victoria Plaza looked polished and expensive. Marble floors reflected golden lighting from above, while soft music played quietly through hidden speakers. Nomonde had never entered a place like that before. Her sandals suddenly sounded too loud against the floor. People turned to stare openly as the guards escorted her through the building. Some customers stepped aside as though poverty itself were contagious. A young woman wearing designer sunglasses frowned openly at Nomonde. "What happened?" she asked one of the guards. "Possible thief," he replied casually. The word hit Nomonde like a slap. She opened her mouth to defend herself, but shame closed her throat. Inside the luxury jewelry showroom upstairs, several employees immediately stopped working when the guards entered with her. At the center of the showroom stood Madame Nkiru Okafor, elegant as always. Her fitted cream-colored dress looked flawless beneath the bright lights, and diamonds sparkled around her neck and wrists. Confidence surrounded her like perfume. The moment her eyes landed on the velvet box, something sharp flashed briefly across her face before disappearing. "What is this?" she asked calmly. The guard handed her the box. "This girl claims she found the ring outside." Madame Nkiru opened it slowly. Several employees gasped softly. "That's Mr. Adewale's ring," one whispered. Nomonde noticed the sudden tension spreading through the room. Madame Nkiru turned her gaze toward her carefully. "And you say you found this?" "Yes, ma'am." "Where exactly?" "Near the plaza entrance yesterday afternoon." Madame Nkiru stepped closer. Her expensive perfume filled the air between them. "You expect us to believe," she said smoothly, "that a poor market girl carrying a fortune inside her bag came here out of pure honesty?" Nomonde lowered her eyes. "I just wanted to return it." A quiet laugh escaped one employee nearby. Madame Nkiru continued studying her carefully. "What is your name?" "Nomonde." "Nomonde." Madame Nkiru repeated softly. "Do you understand how valuable this ring is?" Nomonde nodded faintly. "And yet you carried it around overnight instead of reporting it immediately." Nomonde froze. She had no answer ready. The silence made her look guilty instantly. Madame Nkiru's expression hardened slightly. "How convenient." "It's not like that," Nomonde said quickly. "I was afraid nobody would believe me." Several people exchanged knowing looks. One wealthy customer folded her arms. "Because you planned to sell it first." "No," Nomonde whispered. "But then fear changed your mind," the woman continued mockingly. Nomonde felt heat rising painfully behind her eyes. Everything was happening exactly as she feared. Nobody saw honesty. They only saw poverty standing beside something expensive. The first guard crossed his arms confidently. "We should call the police before she changes her story again." Panic spread through Nomonde immediately. "No, please," she said, "I didn't steal anything." But her trembling voice only made her appear weaker. Madame Nkiru watched her silently for several seconds before speaking again. "Search her bag." Nomonde's heart nearly stopped. "I already gave you the ring," she whispered. "Search it anyway," Madame Nkiru repeated coldly. The second guard grabbed Nomonde's cloth bag roughly and emptied it onto the polished glass counter. A comb, 2 coins, a small bread wrapper, and the old photograph of her mother. Several employees stared at the pathetic collection silently. Humiliation burned through Nomonde's entire body. It felt as though her poverty had been poured onto the counter for public inspection. One customer shook her head with disgust. "These thieves always look innocent." Nomonde clenched her trembling hands tightly together. Tears gathered in her eyes, but she fought desperately not to cry. Then suddenly, movement near the showroom entrance drew everyone's attention. The room fell silent almost instantly. Temitope Adewale had arrived. The entire showroom fell silent the moment Temitope Adewale entered. Even the guards straightened immediately. Nomonde had never seen him before, but she recognized power the instant it entered a room. It moved around him naturally without noise or effort. His dark suit looked perfectly tailored, and his calm face carried the kind of authority that made people stop speaking before he even opened his mouth. But what struck Nomonde most was not his wealth. It was the sadness in his eyes. Temitope's gaze moved slowly across the showroom before settling on the diamond ring resting inside the velvet box. For a brief second, relief flashed across his face. Then he noticed Nomonde standing beside the counter with trembling hands and tear-filled eyes. The relief disappeared immediately. "What happened here?" he asked quietly. Nobody answered at first. Madame Nkiru stepped forward smoothly. "Sir, the ring was recovered this morning." Temitope looked at her carefully. "Recovered?" "One of the guards stopped this girl while she was attempting to bring it into the building." Nomonde's heart tightened painfully. "That's not true," she whispered, but her voice sounded too small against the polished silence surrounding her. Temitope finally looked directly at her. Nomonde immediately lowered her eyes. For some reason, being seen by him felt more frightening than being judged by everyone else. "She claims she found it yesterday," Madame Nkiru continued calmly. "But naturally, there are questions." The guards nodded in agreement. Temitope walked closer toward the counter without speaking. Every employee watched him carefully. The billionaire opened the velvet box himself and stared silently at the diamond ring for several long seconds. Something emotional passed briefly across his face before disappearing again behind control. Then he closed the box gently. "Who searched for it last night?" he asked. "We all did, Madame," Nkiru replied. "Security checked the plaza thoroughly, and CCTV footage." One of the guards cleared his throat nervously. "Some footage from the entrance corridor was corrupted, sir." Temitope's expression hardened slightly. "Corrupted?" "Yes, sir." A dangerous silence followed. Nomonde stood frozen beside the counter, wishing desperately that she could disappear. Wealthy customers still watched her openly whispering among themselves while glancing at her torn dress and worn sandals. One woman shook her head quietly. She obviously planned to sell it. Another customer laughed softly. Poor people always think desperation excuses theft. Nomonde heard every word. Each sentence pressed deeper into her humiliation. She wanted to defend herself. She wanted to explain everything clearly, but shame wrapped itself tightly around her throat. Temitope finally turned toward her again. "What is your name?" he asked calmly. "Nomonde," she answered softly. "How did you find the ring?" She swallowed nervously. "Near the plaza entrance yesterday afternoon." "And why did you wait until today to return it?" The question struck directly into the fear already haunting her. Nomonde hesitated. Immediately, several people exchanged suspicious looks. "She's lying," one employee whispered. Temitope noticed the hesitation too. But unlike the others, he kept watching her face instead of her clothes. "I was afraid," Nomonde admitted quietly. "Afraid of what?" "That nobody would believe me." Those words settled heavily inside the room. For a brief moment, Temitope said nothing, perhaps because he recognized something painfully honest in the way she spoke. But Madame Nkiru quickly interrupted the silence. "Sir, with respect, fear does not explain carrying a diamond ring around Lagos overnight." Nomonde looked up immediately. "I never wanted to keep it." "Then why hide it?" Madame Nkiru asked sharply. "I didn't hide it. You brought it here in a cloth bag." The humiliation returned stronger than before. Nomonde glanced toward the scattered contents of her bag still resting on the glass counter. Her comb, her coins, The old photograph of her mother. The sight made her chest ache. Everything about her poverty had been exposed publicly. One of the guards folded his arms. "Sir, we should involve police immediately before this becomes complicated." Nomonde's breathing quickened. "No, please," she whispered. But the guard continued confidently. "People steal expensive items every day in Lagos. If we ignore this—" She returned the ring. Temitope interrupted quietly. The room fell silent again. The guard hesitated. Sir Temitope's expression remained calm, but his voice carried unmistakable authority now. If her goal was theft, she could have disappeared with it. Nobody answered. The truth in his words made several employees uncomfortable. Madame Nkiru recovered first. Or perhaps she realized selling it would expose her eventually. Temitope looked at her carefully, and yet she still came back. Another silence settled across the showroom. Nomonde stared at the floor, confused by the strange direction of the conversation. She had expected immediate punishment, not questions. Still, suspicion remained heavy in the room. The first guard stepped forward again. "Sir, poor people often return stolen items after panic sets in." Nomonde flinched slightly at the words, "Poor people," as though poverty itself automatically made dishonesty natural. Temitope noticed the reaction immediately. His eyes moved briefly toward Nomonde's hands. They were shaking, not like someone preparing another lie, like someone already exhausted from defending the truth. "What do you do for work?" he asked suddenly. Nomonde looked surprised by the question. "I work in Balogan Market, doing what anything people pay for." A few customers exchanged amused glances. Temitope ignored them. "You support yourself alone." Nomonde nodded slowly. "And your family?" The question pierced something painful inside her instantly. "I don't have one anymore." For the first time since entering the showroom, Temitope's expression softened slightly. He understood loneliness more than most people realized. Before he could speak again, Madame Nkiru crossed her arms elegantly. "Sir, sympathy does not change facts." Temitope turned toward her calmly. "And what facts do we currently have?" "She possessed the ring." She returned the ring. He corrected again. The tension between them became visible immediately. Several employees lowered their eyes awkwardly. Madame Nkiru smiled faintly, though irritation flickered beneath it. "Very well," she said smoothly. "Then perhaps we should ask her one final question." She turned directly toward Nomonde. "When exactly did you decide honesty mattered more than money?" The cruelty hidden beneath the elegant tone struck harder than shouting would have. Several people laughed quietly. Nomonde felt tears burning behind her eyes again, because the painful truth was that temptation had existed. She had imagined selling the ring. She had imagined escaping poverty. For one brief moment, she had wanted it badly enough to frighten herself. And somehow, Madame Nkiru's words made that private struggle feel dirty and shameful. Nomonde lowered her head. "I just wanted to do the right thing," she whispered. The showroom remained silent. Then suddenly, Temitope noticed something unexpected. The woven bracelet around her wrist. Faded red and brown thread. Simple. Old. Handmade. Something about it stirred a strange feeling deep inside his memory, though he couldn't explain why. His eyes remained fixed on it for several seconds. Madame Nkiru noticed immediately. "Sir?" she asked carefully. Temitope slowly looked away from the bracelet. Then his gaze moved toward the old photograph still lying on the counter beside Nomonde's few belongings. Without asking permission, he picked it up gently. Nomonde's heart nearly stopped. "That's my mother," she said quickly. Temitope studied the faded picture silently, a woman smiling while holding a little girl. Years of damage blurred parts of the image, but something about it felt strangely familiar. Before he could think further, one of the guards interrupted again. "Sir, police are waiting for instructions." The atmosphere tightened instantly. Nomonde's entire body went cold. She imagined handcuffs, prison cells, public shame. Nobody listening to her side of the story. Fear overwhelmed her completely. "I didn't steal it," she said suddenly, tears finally escaping down her face. "Please believe me." Her voice cracked painfully. The room grew quiet again. Temitope looked at her for a long moment, while tears rolled silently down her cheeks. Unlike the others, she was not begging for money, escape, or mercy. She was begging to be believed. And somehow that difference mattered to him more than he expected. The showroom remained painfully quiet after Nomonde's voice broke into tears. "I didn't steal it," she whispered again. "Please believe me." Nobody moved. The wealthy customers standing near the glass displays watched her with mixed expressions, some curious, some cold, some openly disgusted. To them, the scene already looked familiar. A poor girl, an expensive ring, a predictable ending. But Temitope Adewale kept studying her face carefully. Not her clothes, not her poverty, her eyes. Over the years, he had met dishonest people wearing expensive suits and genuine people dressed in suffering. Wealth had taught him many things, but one lesson stood above the rest: appearances lied easily. "Everyone leave us for a moment," he said calmly. Several employees exchanged surprised glances. Madame Nkiru frowned slightly. "Sir, I said leave." His tone remained controlled, but nobody mistook it for a request. Slowly, customers and staff stepped away from the center of the showroom, though many continued watching from a distance. The guards remained nearby, arms folded tightly. Nomonde wiped her face quickly, embarrassed that she had cried in front of strangers. Temitope looked toward the scattered contents of her bag again before returning his attention to her. "You said you found the ring yesterday afternoon." "Yes, sir." "Exactly where, near the entrance road outside Victoria Plaza." "What were you doing there?" "I was delivering peppers for a trader from Balogan Market." Temitope nodded slowly. "Did anyone see you pick it up?" Nomonde hesitated before shaking her head. "No." The answer immediately strengthened the suspicion around her. One of the guards muttered quietly, "Convenient." Temitope ignored him. "What did you think when you opened the box?" The question surprised her. Nomonde lowered her eyes again. "I was shocked. And after that," she swallowed hard. For a brief moment, shame crossed her face. Temitope noticed immediately. "You considered keeping it," he said quietly. The room became still again. Nomonde's eyes widened in panic. "I answer honestly." She stared at the floor for several seconds before finally nodding weakly. "Yes." A soft laugh escaped one of the guards. "I knew it." Nomonde's face burned with humiliation. "But I didn't keep it," she said quickly. "I thought about it only for a moment." Madame Nkiru crossed her arms elegantly, How noble! Nomonde ignored the mockery and looked directly at Temitope instead. I was hungry, she admitted softly. I was tired of struggling every day. When I saw the ring, I imagined my life changing. Her honesty surprised everyone. Most people in her position would have denied temptation completely. But Nomonde looked exhausted from pretending. I imagined buying food, she continued quietly. A better room, maybe starting a small business. Tears gathered in her eyes again. For one moment, I wanted all of it. Silence settled heavily across the showroom. Then she lifted her head slightly. But my mother taught me that poverty should never become permission to destroy your conscience. Something shifted inside Temitope as he listened. Not because her story sounded dramatic, because it sounded real. Painfully real. Madame Nkiru, however, remained unmoved. Sir emotional speeches changed nothing. She still carried the ring around overnight. Temitope finally looked toward the guards. You said CCTV footage from the entrance corridor was corrupted. Yes, sir, Chinadu answered carefully. Only that corridor. Yes. Temitope's expression hardened slightly. Interesting. Madame Nkiru stepped forward smoothly. Technical problems happen all the time. Not usually at the exact moment expensive items disappear. The tension in the room thickened instantly. Nomonde remained silent, confused by the strange atmosphere forming around her. She could feel that something larger than the ring itself existed beneath the conversation, though she did not understand what. Temitope looked back at her. What did you plan to do this morning before the guards stopped you? I wanted to return the ring quietly and leave without asking for money. Nomonde looked shocked by the idea. Yes. One employee nearby whispered, that makes no sense. But Temitope continued calmly. Why? Nomonde stared at him for several seconds before answering. Because if I sold it, I would spend the rest of my life remembering that I became dishonest the moment life tested me. Those words landed differently than she expected. Even the employees stopped whispering. Temitope slowly glanced toward the old photograph of her mother still lying on the counter. Then his eyes moved again to the woven bracelet around her wrist. A strange feeling tugged at his memory once more. Something familiar. Something distant. Before he could think further, Chinadu suddenly spoke again. Sir, with respect, we still cannot confirm her story. There are no witnesses. Temitope looked toward him calmly. And there is also no evidence she stole it. She possessed it. She returned it. The guard fell silent immediately. Madame Nkiru sighed softly, as though exhausted by unnecessary compassion. Sir, wealthy people are targeted every day by manipulative stories. We cannot ignore obvious risk because someone cries convincingly. Nomonde flinched slightly. Temitope noticed. For several long seconds, nobody spoke. Then suddenly, his assistant hurried into the showroom, carrying a tablet. Sir, he said nervously, we found something. The atmosphere shifted instantly. What is it? Temitope asked. The assistant glanced briefly toward Nomonde before lowering his voice. Security reviewed the backup server from the plaza cameras. Hope flickered inside Nomonde immediately. And Temitope asked. The assistant hesitated. The footage from Corridor 3 is completely missing. A cold silence filled the room. Temitope's eyes narrowed slightly. Missing. Yes, sir. Not corrupted. Deleted. Several employees gasped softly. Madame Nkiru's expression remained controlled, but her fingers tightened briefly against her handbag. Temitope noticed. Who had access to that system? He asked quietly. The assistant looked uncomfortable. Only authorized security personnel. Slowly, Temitope turned toward the guards. Chinedu's face changed instantly. Sir, I swear I know nothing about deleted footage. Nobody answered immediately. The missing footage changed everything. Before Nomonde had looked like a poor girl caught with a stolen ring. Now suddenly the situation looked far more complicated. Madame Nkiru recovered quickly. Deleted footage proves nothing, she said smoothly. Someone could have removed it after stealing the ring. Yes, Temitope replied calmly. Someone could have. His eyes remained fixed on Chinedu. Sweat appeared faintly along the guard's forehead. Nomonde stood frozen in confusion while fear and hope battled inside her chest. For the first time since entering the showroom, she felt the suspicion around her weakening slightly. Not disappearing, but weakening. Temitope walked slowly toward the large showroom windows overlooking Lagos traffic below. The city moved endlessly outside millions of strangers surviving, lying, struggling, hoping. Then he turned back toward Nomonde. If your story is true, he said quietly, returning this ring may have placed you in danger you do not understand. Nomonde blinked in confusion. Danger? Before she could ask what he meant, Madame Nkiru interrupted smoothly. Sir, surely we are not frightening the girl unnecessarily. But Temitope kept watching Nomonde carefully. For the first time in years, his instincts were warning him that something hidden stood behind this situation. Something larger than theft. And somehow the frightened orphan girl standing inside his showroom had already become part of it. The atmosphere inside the showroom changed completely after the discovery that the CCTV footage had been deleted. Not corrupted. Deleted. That single word hung heavily in the air while customers whispered among themselves and employees exchanged nervous glances. Nomonde stood silently near the glass counter, confused and frightened. She did not fully understand what was happening anymore. Only minutes earlier, everyone had looked at her as though her guilt was obvious. Now suspicion was beginning to move in another direction, toward the security staff, toward something hidden. Temitope Adewale remained calm, but his mind was moving quickly. Deleted footage meant intention, planning. Someone inside the building had wanted the ring to disappear without explanation. His eyes shifted briefly toward Madame Nkiru. She stood perfectly composed beside the display counter, her elegant posture unchanged. But Temitope had spent years negotiating billion-dollar deals and watching powerful people lie with beautiful smiles. He noticed details others missed. The slight tension in her jaw, the careful control in her breathing, the way she avoided looking directly at Chinedu. Who had access to the security system last night? Temitope asked quietly. Chinedu answered immediately. Only authorized guards, sir. And who supervised them? The guard hesitated. Madame Nkiru spoke smoothly before he could answer. Surely we are not accusing employees without evidence. Temitope turned toward her calmly. I'm asking questions. She smiled faintly. Of course. But beneath the polished tone, irritation flickered. Nomonde watched the exchange carefully. She felt invisible and trapped at the same time. Nobody had allowed her to leave yet. Nobody seemed certain what to do with her anymore. One of the wealthy customers crossed her arms impatiently. "This is becoming ridiculous," she said. The girl still possessed the ring. Another woman nodded. "Exactly. Poor people know how to manipulate sympathy." Nomonde lowered her eyes again. Even now, after the deleted footage, suspicion continued, finding its way back to her. Temitope noticed the shame crossing her face. "You may sit down," he told her quietly. Nomonde blinked in surprise. No one had spoken kindly to her since she entered the building. "There," he added, pointing toward a chair near the counter. She moved slowly, almost nervously, as though expecting someone to change their mind and shout at her again. Madame Nkiru watched the moment carefully. Interesting, she thought. Temitope was already becoming emotionally involved. That could become dangerous. She stepped closer toward him and lowered her voice slightly. "Sir, may I speak with you privately?" Temitope looked at her for several seconds before nodding once. They moved toward the far side of the showroom while employees pretended not to listen. Nomonde sat quietly with her hands folded tightly together in her lap. Her heart still raced painfully inside her chest. From where she sat, she could hear only fragments of the conversation: company reputation, police involvement, media attention. Then Madame Nkiru's voice became softer. "You're allowing emotion to cloud judgment," Temitope answered calmly. "And you're pushing very hard for someone without evidence." A dangerous silence followed. Madame Nkiru forced another elegant smile. "I'm protecting your interests." "My interests," Temitope replied quietly, "or yours?" For the first time, her composure cracked slightly. Only slightly, but enough. Meanwhile, Chinedu stood near the entrance, trying unsuccessfully to hide his growing nervousness. Sweat gathered beneath his collar, despite the cold air conditioning. One employee approached him carefully. "Did you really delete the footage?" "Of course not," he snapped too quickly. The employee stepped back immediately. Chinedu cursed silently under his breath. This was not how things were supposed to happen. The original plan had been simple. The ring would disappear temporarily, confusion would spread, and Madame Nkiru would later recover it herself while strengthening her influence over Temitope and the Adewale family business. Instead, some poor market girl had found it first. And worse, she had actually returned it. Now everything was becoming unstable. Across the showroom, Nomonde quietly noticed the old photograph of her mother still resting on the counter. One employee had moved it aside carelessly near a jewelry tray. She stood slowly and walked toward it. Before she could reach it, a young saleswoman muttered under her breath, "Watch her hands." The words cut deeply. Nomonde froze immediately. Even touching her own belongings now looked suspicious. Temitope heard the comment from across the room. His expression darkened slightly. "She may take her photograph," he said firmly. The saleswoman looked embarrassed. "Sorry, sir." Nomonde picked up the picture carefully and held it close against her chest. Something about that small movement affected Temitope unexpectedly. People protected what mattered most to them instinctively. Wealthy people protected money. Powerful people protected influence. But Nomonde protected a damaged photograph. That told him something important about her. Madame Nkiru noticed his attention again and silently grew more irritated. This girl was becoming a problem far beyond the ring itself. A few minutes later, Temitope's assistant returned, carrying printed security reports. "Sir, we reviewed staff movement logs from yesterday." And the assistant glanced briefly toward Chinedu before continuing. "One guard accessed Corridor 3 security controls shortly before the footage disappeared." The showroom became silent again. Temitope slowly looked toward Chinedu. The guard's face lost color immediately. "Sir, I can't explain." "Please do," Temitope said calmly. Chinedu swallowed hard. "I only checked the cameras because Madame Nkiru requested extra monitoring before the jewelry presentation." Every eye in the room shifted toward her instantly. Madame Nkiru remained composed. "That is true," she said smoothly. "I requested additional security checks. That hardly makes me responsible for deleted footage." Temitope studied both of them carefully. Nomonde sat frozen, realizing she had somehow become trapped inside conflicts between powerful people. Fear slowly returned to her chest. What if they blamed her anyway, just to protect themselves? What if rich people simply decided the truth no longer mattered? She suddenly remembered Auntie Bimpi's warning. Truth is expensive in places where rich people make the rules. The thought made her stomach tighten painfully. Temitope noticed her expression again. "You're afraid," he said quietly. Nomonde hesitated before answering honestly. "Yes." "Of what?" She looked around the luxurious showroom filled with wealthy strangers. "People like me are always blamed first," she admitted softly. The honesty of the statement silenced the room. Even some employees looked uncomfortable hearing it spoken aloud so directly. Madame Nkiru crossed her arms. "Victimhood does not prove innocence." "No," Temitope replied calmly. "But neither does poverty prove guilt." Their eyes locked briefly. A quiet battle of power and control passed between them. Then suddenly, Temitope's assistant spoke again. "Sir, there's one more thing. We found partial footage from an external camera outside the plaza." Hope flickered briefly across Nomonde's face. The assistant continued carefully. "The image quality is poor, but it clearly shows the ring box already lying near the entrance road before Nomonde arrived." The room exploded into whispers. One customer looked shocked. "So she may actually have found it." Chinedu immediately looked away. Madame Nkiru's face remained calm, but anger burned behind her eyes now. Temitope slowly turned toward Nomonde again. For the first time since she entered the building, the suspicions surrounding her had weakened enough for something else to appear. Respect. Not from everyone, but from him. Nomonde felt it immediately, and somehow that frightened her more than the accusations had. Because deep inside, she sensed this situation was no longer simply about a missing ring. Something larger was unfolding around her, and powerful people were beginning to lose control of it. By late afternoon, most of the wealthy customers had finally left the showroom, but tension still lingered heavily in the air. Employees whispered in corners, while security guards avoided direct eye contact with Temitope Adewale. Nobody fully understood what would happen next. The discovery of deleted footage had complicated everything, and at the center of it all stood Nomonde, a poor orphan girl who looked as though she did not belong anywhere near luxury jewelry or billionaire family secrets. Nomonde remained seated quietly, near the counter, clutching her mother's photograph tightly against her chest. Exhaustion had settled into every part of her body. She had not eaten since morning, and the emotional humiliation of the day left her feeling weak. For hours, people had looked at her like a criminal. Even now, she could still hear their whispers. Poor girl. Thief. Manipulator. The words replayed painfully inside her mind. Temitope stood near the showroom windows, speaking quietly with his assistant. Every few seconds, his eyes drifted back toward Nomonde. Something about her continued bothering him. Not in a dangerous way, in a familiar way. He had spent most of his life surrounded by polished people who carefully hid their true intentions. But Nomonde's emotions sat openly on her face: fear, shame, exhaustion, honesty. She did not know how to manipulate power because she had never possessed any. Madame Nkiru approached him again. "Sir, the board is already asking questions," she said carefully. Temitope kept his eyes on the city outside. About what? About why police haven't been called. He finally looked at her. "And your opinion?" She folded her arms elegantly. "This situation is becoming risky. Journalists could hear rumors. If the media reports that a valuable family ring disappeared under our security, you're worried about reputation. I'm worried about damage." Temitope studied her calmly. Interesting choice of words. Madame Nkiru's expression tightened slightly. Before she could answer, Nomonde slowly stood from her chair. "Sir," she said softly. Both of them turned toward her. Nomonde lowered her eyes respectfully. "Can I leave now?" The question filled the room with uncomfortable silence. She looked so tired standing there, so small against the polished luxury surrounding her. Temitope noticed her trembling hands again. "Do you have somewhere safe to go?" he asked. Nomonde nodded quickly. "Yes?" But the hesitation before the answer lasted too long. Madame Nkiru noticed immediately. "Sir, surely you are not considering further involvement." Temitope ignored her. "You live alone?" he asked Nomonde. "Yes." "In Lagos?" "Yes." Something about that answer unsettled him. Lagos was not gentle toward vulnerable people, especially young women without protection. He knew stories most newspapers never printed. Girls disappearing, false accusations destroying lives, powerful people escaping consequences because poor people could not fight back. And now, Nomonde had unknowingly become connected to something dangerous. Temitope made a decision quietly. "You shouldn't return home tonight." Nomonde looked shocked. "Sir, there are still unanswered questions surrounding this situation. I already told the truth." "I know." The words surprised even her. For the first time since entering the building, someone powerful had spoken, as though he believed her. Madame Nkiru stepped forward immediately. "Sir, this is unnecessary." Temitope's voice remained calm. "No. What's unnecessary is pretending nothing suspicious happened here." Silence followed. Then he turned toward an older woman standing near the showroom entrance. "Mama Abina." The woman approached respectfully. She looked to be in her late 50s, dressed neatly in a simple navy wrapper and blouse. Unlike the others, her eyes carried warmth rather than judgment when they landed on Nomonde. "Yes, sir. Please arrange a guest room at the Okoye house." Madame Nkiru stared at him in disbelief. "You're bringing her into your home. Temitope answered without looking at her. Temporarily. Nomonde panicked immediately. No, sir, I can't. Why not? She looked down at her faded dress in embarrassment. I don't belong in places like that. Mama Abena's face softened slightly. Temitope remained quiet for a moment before speaking carefully. You returned something valuable when nobody expected honesty from you. The least I can do is make sure you are safe until this matter is resolved. Nomonde did not know what to say. Part of her wanted desperately to leave. Everything about this world frightened her. The polished floors, the expensive clothing, the quiet way powerful people spoke while hiding dangerous things beneath their smiles. But another part of her knew returning alone to her tiny rented corner suddenly felt unsafe, too, especially after what had happened today. Madame Incru's voice became colder. Sir, you barely know this girl. Temitope finally turned fully toward her. And yet, you decided she was guilty within minutes of meeting her. The words landed sharply. Several employees lowered their eyes. Madame Nkiru forced a controlled smile. I'm being practical. No, Temitope replied quietly. You're being selective. For a brief moment, anger flashed openly across her face before disappearing again. Nomonde noticed it, and suddenly, fear returned stronger than before. She did not fully understand why, but instinct warned her not to trust Madame Nkiru, not even slightly. Half an hour later, Nomonde stood outside Victoria Plaza beside a black luxury SUV waiting near the entrance. The evening sky above Lagos had turned deep orange, while traffic filled the roads with endless noise. Mama Abena opened the car door gently. You may sit, my child. Nomonde hesitated. She had never ridden in a vehicle like this before. Even touching the smooth leather seats felt wrong somehow, as though poverty itself might stain them. Mama Abena noticed immediately. You don't need to be afraid. Nomonde nodded quietly and entered the car. As the SUV pulled away from Victoria Plaza, she looked back through the window toward the towering glass bay building disappearing behind them. Everything about the day felt unreal. Yesterday, she had been carrying vegetables through Balogan Market. Now she was riding through Lagos beside people connected to billionaires and dangerous secrets. Mama Abena studied her gently. You're hungry. Nomonde looked embarrassed. I'm fine. The older woman smiled knowingly. That means yes. From a small bag beside her, Mama Abena removed a wrapped meat pie and bottled water. Nomonde's eyes widened slightly. For me, unless you think I'm planning to eat both. Despite everything, a small laugh escaped Nomonde's lips. It was the first time she had laughed all day. She accepted the food carefully. Thank you. Mama Abena watched her begin eating slowly. You remind me of someone, the older woman said quietly. Nomonde looked up nervously. Who? Mama Abena smiled faintly. Someone who also tried too hard to survive without asking anybody for help. The car continued moving through Lagos traffic while city lights slowly brightened outside. But inside Victoria Plaza, Madame Nkiru remained standing near the showroom windows with cold anger burning behind her calm expression. This situation was slipping beyond control. Temitope was asking too many questions. And worst of all, the orphan girl was still close enough to become dangerous. Chinadu approached nervously after the others left. "What do we do now?" he whispered. Madame Nikiru's eyes remained fixed on the city outside. "We make sure that girl stops looking innocent." Chinedu swallowed hard. "How?" Finally, Madame Nkiru turned toward him slowly. "There are many ways to destroy poor people," she said quietly, "especially when nobody powerful truly knows them." Far across the city, Nomonde sat silently inside the luxury SUV, unaware that while one powerful person had begun protecting her, another had already started planning how to ruin her completely. Nomonde had never seen a house like the one in Ikoyi. The black gates alone looked larger than the entire compound where she rented her tiny room behind the food stall. Soft golden lights lined the driveway, reflecting against polished stone pathways and carefully trimmed gardens. As the SUV rolled slowly forward, Nomonde pressed nervously against the seat. Everything about this place felt too clean, too quiet, too expensive. Mama Abena noticed immediately. "You don't need to look so frightened," she said gently. Nomonde gave a small, embarrassed smile. "I've never been anywhere like this before." That's not a crime, but to Nomonde, it almost felt like one. The car finally stopped near the mansion entrance. Two house staff members opened the doors immediately, while Mama Abena stepped out first. Nomonde followed carefully, afraid even her worn sandals might dirty the polished floor beneath her feet. Inside the house looked even more overwhelming. Large chandeliers hung from high ceilings, while soft music played quietly somewhere in the distance. The air smelled faintly of flowers and expensive furniture polish. Nomonde lowered her eyes automatically. People from her world entered places like this only to clean them, never to stay inside them. Mama Abena led her upstairs to a quiet guest room overlooking the city lights. "You may sleep here tonight." Nomonde froze near the doorway. The room alone looked larger than every place she had lived during the last 5 years combined. Clean white sheets covered the bed. Folded towels rested neatly beside a bathroom she could hardly believe belonged inside a private room. "This is for me?" she asked quietly. Mama Abena smiled softly. "Unless you see another guest standing here." Nomonde stepped inside slowly. For several seconds, she simply stared at everything in disbelief. Then shame suddenly returned. Her clothes looked terrible inside a room like this. Her tired body smelled like market dust and sweat. She hugged her cloth bag tighter against herself. "I don't belong here," she whispered, before realizing she had spoken aloud. Mama Abena turned toward her carefully. "Do you know what I've learned after working in wealthy homes for many years?" Nomonde shook her head. "Money changes comfort," the older woman replied softly, "but it does not change human value." Nomonde looked away quickly before tears returned to her eyes again. Too many emotions had filled the day already. Mama Abena gently placed folded clothing on the bed. "These belonged to my daughter before she moved abroad. You may wear them tonight." Nomonde touched the fabric carefully. Soft, clean, beautiful. Nobody had gifted her clothing in years. "Thank you," she whispered. Mama Abena nodded warmly before leaving her alone. The moment the door closed, silence filled the room. Nomonde stood motionless for several seconds. Then slowly, exhaustion overtook her completely. She sat on the edge of the bed and covered her face with trembling hands. Everything felt unreal. Just 2 days earlier, she had been worrying about buying bread in Belogan Market. Now she sat inside a billionaire's mansion because she returned a diamond ring. Fear still remained beneath the confusion. People like Madame Nkiru frightened her deeply. The elegant woman's smile never reached her eyes. Even worse, Nomonde sensed she had become trapped inside problems far larger than herself. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Mama Abena entered, carrying a tray of food. Rice, chicken stew, fruit, warm bread. The smell alone almost broke Nomonde's heart. "You should eat," Mama Abena said gently. Nomonde stared at the tray silently. It had been so long since someone prepared food specifically for her that she no longer remembered how to react. "You don't have to stand there looking guilty," Mama Abena added with a smile. "Food exists to be eaten." A weak laugh escaped Nomonde. Slowly, she sat beside the tray. The first bite nearly brought tears to her eyes. Not because the food was luxurious, because she was tired of surviving on almost nothing. Mama Abena watched her quietly for a moment. "How long have you lived alone?" Nomonde swallowed carefully before answering. "Since I was 16. That's too young." Nomonde gave a faint shrug. "Life didn't ask my age first." The older woman's expression softened. For a while, only silence filled the room, while Nomonde ate slowly, almost cautiously, as though afraid the meal might disappear if she moved too quickly. Then Mama Abena noticed the old photograph resting near the bed. Your mother Nomonde nodded immediately. "She was beautiful, Mama," Abena said softly. Nomonde smiled sadly. "I don't remember her voice clearly anymore." The confession hurt more than she expected. Some nights she stayed awake trying desperately to remember simple details about her parents, the sound of laughter, the feeling of safety, the smell of her mother's clothes. Time had stolen pieces of them little by little. What happened after they died? Mama Abena asked gently. Nomonde lowered her eyes. "My relatives took me in. At first," she said quietly, "but nobody really wanted another mouth to feed." Pain slowly returned to her face as old memories surfaced. One aunt used to lock food away before sleeping because she thought I ate too much. She laughed weakly. Most days I was hungrier than angry. Mama Abena listened silently. "I worked instead of going to school," Nomonde continued, "cleaning, cooking, carrying water. Sometimes people paid me. Sometimes they only said I should be grateful for shelter. And eventually, they sent me away." The words came calmly now, because suffering repeated too often eventually lost its ability to sound dramatic. Nomonde looked toward the city lights outside the window. "I slept in markets sometimes, church compounds too." She touched the woven bracelet around her wrist unconsciously. "Then I found work at Belogan Market." Mama Abena felt something tighten painfully inside her chest. So much hardship. Yet somehow the girl still returned the ring, still chose honesty. Meanwhile, downstairs in his private office, Temitope sat alone reviewing security reports again. But his attention kept drifting back toward Nomonde's face, especially when she said poverty should never become permission to destroy your conscience. He understood that sentence more deeply than she realized. Many wealthy people believe poverty created dishonesty, but Temitope had spent years watching greed grow strongest among people who already possessed everything. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. "Come in." His assistant entered carefully. "Sir, we investigated Chinedu further." Temitope looked up immediately. "And?" He recently received several unexplained bank transfers. Temitope's expression hardened. From who? We're still tracing them. Silence settled across the office. The billionaire slowly leaned back in his chair. The situation was becoming clearer now. Someone inside his circle wanted control of that ring badly enough to manipulate security systems and frame an innocent girl. But why? His thoughts shifted suddenly toward Madame Nkiru again. Too many coincidences surrounded her involvement. Too much pressure to blame Nomonde quickly. A dangerous feeling settled inside him then. The ring was connected to his missing sister. If someone wanted access to it badly enough to create false accusations, then perhaps the truth surrounding his family's past was not as buried as he once believed. Upstairs, Nomonde finally lay down on the soft bed after finishing her meal. For the first time in years, her body rested against comfort instead of hard concrete or thin fabric. But sleep did not come easily, because deep inside she sensed her life was already changing in ways she could not stop anymore. And somewhere beneath all the fear, humiliation, and confusion, fate itself seemed to be pulling her slowly toward a truth hidden for many years. Nomonde woke slowly the next morning, confused by the softness beneath her body. For a few seconds, she forgot where she was. Then the unfamiliar ceiling above her, the quiet air conditioning, and the clean white curtains pulled reality back into place. The billionaire's house. The memory of everything that happened inside Victoria Plaza returned all at once: the accusations, the humiliation, the diamond ring, the suspicious missing footage. Her stomach tightened immediately. She sat up quickly, afraid she had overslept, but sunlight was only beginning to enter through the curtains. Somewhere beyond the room, she could hear distant movement inside the mansion. Carefully, Nomonde touched the woven bracelet around her wrist. Mama Isi's bracelet. The small red and brown threads looked strangely out of place against the clean bed sheets and elegant furniture surrounding her. Yet somehow, it was the one thing inside the room that still made her feel safe. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," she answered quietly. Mama Abena entered, carrying folded clothes and a tray of tea. "Good morning, my child." "Good morning, Mama." The older woman smiled warmly. "You slept?" Nomonde nodded. "Better than I expected. That bed has probably healed many tired backs." A faint laugh escaped Nomonde. Mama Abena placed the tray down carefully. "Mr. Adewale asked if you would join him for breakfast later." Nomonde's expression changed immediately. "Breakfast," she repeated nervously. "Yes." With him, Mama Abena looked amused. "He doesn't usually invite criminals to breakfast." Nomonde lowered her eyes, quickly embarrassed. Even after everything that happened yesterday, part of her still feared everyone secretly believed she was guilty. Mama Abena noticed the worry immediately. "You are safe here," she said gently. Nomonde wanted to believe that, but deep inside, fear still lingered. After Mama Abena left, Nomonde slowly changed into the clean dress laid out for her. The soft fabric felt strange against her skin. She barely recognized herself when she looked into the mirror. For years, survival had left no space for vanity. She usually avoided mirrors completely because exhaustion always stared back at her. But now she looked different. Still poor. Still uncertain. Yet somehow lighter. Downstairs, Temitope sat alone at the long dining table reviewing documents while untouched coffee cooled beside him. His thoughts had barely rested all night. The deeper security investigations went, the more suspicious everything became. Financial records connected Chinedu to hidden payments, and several employees admitted Madame Nkiru insisted unusually heavily on controlling access during the jewelry presentation. Still nothing fully explained why the ring mattered so much to her. Temitope looked down at the family ring resting beside the papers. Memories returned again. His mother, crying quietly in hospital light, her trembling voice begging him never to stop searching for Zanele. The pain in her face every birthday after the disappearance. For years, Temitope believed the search had failed forever. Yet recently, small details kept disturbing him. Old records from the village where Zanele disappeared had surfaced unexpectedly. Certain names connected to the past had begun appearing again in business circles around Lagos. And now the ring vanished at the exact same time. Nothing felt accidental anymore. Footsteps interrupted his thoughts. Temitope looked up as Nomonde entered the dining room carefully behind Mama Abena. Immediately he noticed the nervousness in her posture. She stood as though afraid to touch anything. "Good morning," he said calmly. Nomonde lowered her eyes respectfully. "Good morning, sir. Please sit." She obeyed slowly. The dining table alone probably cost more money than she could imagine earning in years. Crystal glasses reflected morning light, while warm food filled silver dishes across the table. Nomonde felt completely out of place. Temitope noticed immediately. "You don't need to look so frightened." "I'm sorry." "For what?" She hesitated. "I don't know." The honesty almost made him smile. Mama Abena quietly served breakfast before leaving them alone. For several moments, silence filled the room. Nomonde barely touched the food. Temitope finally spoke first. "Mama Abena told me you've been alone since 16. Nomonde nodded carefully. "And you never returned to school, Nome." "Why?" She gave a faint, sad smile. Survival became more important. Temitope looked at her thoughtfully. There was no self-pity in the way she spoke. Only exhaustion. That affected him more deeply, though, than dramatic suffering ever could. "You still have your mother's photograph." Nomonde's hand moved instinctively toward her cloth bag resting beside the chair. "It's all I have left." Temitope studied her quietly for a moment. "Do you remember where your family originally came from?" The question surprised her. "A village near Ibadan," she answered slowly. "At least that's what my mother told me." Something inside Temitope shifted immediately. "Do you know the village name?" Nomonde frowned slightly while trying to remember. "She used to mention Afola sometimes." Temitope's expression changed subtly. That was the same region where his younger sister disappeared years ago. Coincidence? Probably coincidence. Still, something about it unsettled him. Before he could ask another question, Nomonde reached absent-mindedly for the woven bracelet around her wrist. Temitope noticed instantly. "Where did you get that bracelet?" Nomonde looked down. "An old woman gave it to me at Balogan Market." "Old woman?" "Yes. Her name is Mama Asi." Temitope leaned back slowly. The name meant nothing to him, but the bracelet did, because suddenly he remembered seeing something similar years ago. On Zanele, his younger sister used to wear woven bracelets, handmade by village women during childhood visits outside Lagos. Temitope stared carefully at the faded red and brown threads around Nomonde's wrist. May I see it? Nomonde hesitated briefly before extending her hand. The moment Temitope touched the bracelet, an old memory hit him sharply. Two children running through dusty village roads, Zanele laughing while showing him colorful, woven bracelets around her wrist. I want to keep them forever, she had said proudly. Temitope slowly released Nomonde's hand. His heart was beating harder now. Sir Nomonde asked nervously. Before he could answer, hurried footsteps entered the dining room. Mama Abena appeared breathless near the doorway. Sir, there's someone outside asking for the girl. Temitope frowned slightly. Who? She says her name is Mama Eshi. Nomonde stood immediately in shock. Mama Eshi. Temitope exchanged a quick glance with Mama Abena. Bring her in. A few moments later, the elderly woman entered slowly with the help of her wooden walking stick. The instant her eyes landed on Nomonde, relief crossed her tired face. My daughter. Nomonde hurried toward her. Mama, how did you find me? Market people talk too much, Mama, Assi replied softly. Then suddenly her eyes shifted toward Temitope. Everything changed. The old woman froze completely. Her face lost color. The walking stick trembled slightly in her hands. Temitope stared back at her with equal confusion. Something strange passed between them, recognition buried beneath years and age. Then, Mama Essie's eyes moved slowly toward the family ring resting on the dining table. A quiet gasp escaped her lips. No, she whispered. The room fell silent, instantly. Temitope stood slowly from his chair. You know this ring, Mama Essie looked terrified now. And when her eyes finally returned to Nomonde, tears suddenly filled them. Oh God, she whispered painfully. It cannot be. The dining room fell completely silent after Mama Essie whispered those trembling words. Oh God, it cannot be. Nomonde looked between the old woman and Temitope in confusion. What cannot be? She asked softly. Mama Essie's breathing had become uneven. Her tired hands gripped the walking stick tightly while tears gathered in her eyes. Temitope stepped forward carefully. You know something? He said quietly. The old woman looked at the family ring resting on the dining table again. Fear moved visibly across her face now, as though painful memories had suddenly returned after years of silence. Before she could answer, footsteps echoed quickly through the hallway. Temitope's assistant entered carrying several documents. Sir, I'm sorry to interrupt, but this is urgent. Temitope frowned slightly. What happened? The assistant looked uneasy. Police officers arrived at Victoria Plaza this morning. Nomonde's heart immediately tightened. Police, she whispered. The assistant nodded. Someone filed an official theft complaint against Nomonde during the night. Shock spread across the room instantly. Temitope's expression darkened. Who authorized that? We traced the report through one of the company legal offices. Madame Nkiru. The answer became obvious immediately, even before anyone spoke her name aloud. Nomonde felt panic rising through her chest again. But I returned the ring, she said weakly. Temitope's jaw tightened. Yes, he replied coldly. You did. The assistant continued carefully. The complaint claims she worked with outside accomplices to temporarily hide the ring before returning it. Nomonde stared at him in disbelief. No, that's not true. Mama Essie suddenly stepped closer, protectively beside her. She is innocent. Everyone turned toward the old woman. Temitope noticed the certainty in her voice immediately. How do you know? He asked quietly. Mama Isi looked at Nomonde with deep sadness. Because her mother was the same. Nomonde blinked in confusion. You knew my mother? The old woman closed her eyes briefly before answering. A long time ago. Before anyone could question further, another staff member hurried into the room looking nervous. Sir, police vehicles are approaching the house. Nomonde's face lost color instantly. Fear hit her so hard, she nearly stepped backward. Temitope reacted immediately. No one enters this property without my permission. Yes, sir. The employee hurried away again. Nomonde's breathing became shallow. They think I'm a criminal, she whispered. Temitope looked directly at her. You are not going anywhere. But the police, I said you are not going anywhere. His calm authority stopped her panic briefly. Still, tears gathered in her eyes again. All her life, accusations came easier than understanding. Poor people rarely receive the benefit of doubt. Once suspicion touched them, it spread quickly. Mama Essie suddenly reached for Nomonde's hand. You must stay strong now. Nomonde looked confused. Mama, what is happening? The old woman hesitated. Fear moved across her face again. Before she could answer, Temitope spoke first. We'll discuss everything later. No. Mama Essie knew they were running out of time. If Madame Nkiru had already involved police, then the situation was becoming far more dangerous than anyone realized. She deserves the truth, the old woman whispered. Temitope looked at her carefully. What truth? Mama Essie's eyes filled slowly with tears. The girl's mother, her name was Ayanda. Nomonde froze completely. Nobody had spoken her mother's name in years. How do you know that? She asked shakily. Mama Essie swallowed painfully. Because I knew her when she was young. Temitope felt something tighten sharply inside his chest. Ayanda, he repeated quietly. The name stirred an old memory. Years ago, investigators searching for his missing sister mentioned rumors about a young woman living under a different name after disappearing from her village during violent unrest. Ayanda. His heartbeat slowly quickened. What exactly are you saying? He asked carefully. Mama Essie looked terrified now. I'm saying, her voice trembled, I think Nomonde's mother may have been connected to your family. The room became silent. Nomonde stared at the old woman in disbelief. Temitope's expression hardened with shock. Before either of them could speak, again loud voices suddenly echoed from outside downstairs. Police officers had entered the front gate. Nomonde panicked instantly. They came for me. She stepped backward automatically. Mama Abena moved beside her protectively. No one will drag you anywhere. But fear had already overwhelmed Nomonde completely. Years of poverty taught her one brutal lesson. Once authorities decided poor people were guilty, innocence often stopped mattering. Downstairs, heavy footsteps echoed through the mansion entrance. Temitope's assistant hurried back into the dining room. Sir, they insist on speaking with the girl immediately. Temitope's expression turned cold. Did they bring an arrest warrant? No, sir. Then they'll wait. The assistant nodded quickly and left again. Mama Isi suddenly grabbed Temitope's arm weakly. You must listen to me carefully. He turned toward her immediately. Ayanda once carried a bracelet exactly like that one, the old woman whispered, pointing toward Nomonde's wrist. The same colors, the same weaving. Temitope stared at the bracelet again. Memories crashed harder inside him now. Zanele wearing woven bracelets as a child. Zanele disappearing during chaos in the village. Rumors years later about a frightened young woman traveling under another name. Could it be possible? No. It sounded impossible. And yet, Nomonde stood frozen nearby, overwhelmed by confusion and fear. My mother never mentioned rich families, she whispered. Mama Essie looked at her sadly. Because she was hiding. Hiding from who? Before the old woman could answer, another voice suddenly interrupted from the doorway. From the truth. Everyone turned instantly. Madame Nkiru stood there, elegantly dressed in cream-colored silk, her expression calm as always. 2 police officers remained behind her. Nomonde's stomach dropped. How did you enter? Temitope asked coldly. Madame Nkiru smiled faintly. Concern for company reputation opens many doors. Temitope stepped forward immediately. You had no authority to come here, and you had no authority to hide a theft suspect inside your private residence. The words hit Nomonde like a slap. I didn't steal anything, she whispered again. Madame Nkiru ignored her completely. Instead, her attention moved slowly toward Mama Essie. For the first time since arriving, real tension entered her face. You, she said quietly. Mama Essie's grip tightened around her walking stick. Madame Nkiru stared carefully at the old woman now. Recognition, fear, anger. Something dangerous passed briefly between them. Temitope noticed immediately. You know each other. Neither woman answered. The silence itself became confirmation. Madame Nkiru recovered first. This woman is unstable, she said smoothly. She wanders markets inventing stories. Mama Essie suddenly straightened despite her age. I know what you did. The room froze again. Madame Nkiru's eyes darkened instantly. Temitope stepped between them slowly. What is she talking about? No one answered immediately. Then Mama Isi looked directly at Nomonde, and with tears running down her tired face, she whispered the words that changed everything. Your mother did not abandon her family willingly. The room remained frozen after Mama Essie's words. Your mother did not abandon her family willingly. Nomonde stared at the old woman in shock, barely able to breathe. All her life, she believed her mother had simply run from the past. Relatives spoke about Ayanda with bitterness and silence. Nobody ever explained anything clearly. Questions were always pushed away like unwanted memories. And now suddenly, an old woman from the market was saying everything Nomonde believed might be wrong. Madame Nkiru recovered first. This is nonsense, she said sharply, but something in her voice sounded strained now. Temitope noticed immediately. Mama Essie slowly turned toward her. You remember me, the old woman whispered. Madame Nkiru's expression hardened. I remember a woman who talks too much. No, Mama Essie replied quietly. You remember the village. The silence that followed felt dangerous. Temitope stepped closer. What village? Neither woman answered immediately. Then Mama Essie finally spoke. Afola. The words struck Temitope like a physical blow. Affola, the same village connected to Zanelle's disappearance, the same place Nomonde's mother once mentioned. His pulse quickened. Madame Nkiru folded her arms tightly. Old stories prove nothing. Then why are you afraid of them? Mama Essie asked. For the first time, anger flashed openly across Madame Nkiru's face. Enough. The two police officers near the doorway exchanged uncertain glances. They no longer looked confident about the situation. Temitope turned toward them calmly. Did you come here with evidence? One officer cleared his throat awkwardly. We only received a theft complaint, sir. And now? The officer hesitated before answering carefully. The situation appears complicated. Madame Nkiru stepped forward immediately. The girl still possessed stolen property. She returned it, Temitope replied coldly. But she returned it. His voice cut through the room sharply enough to silence everyone. Nomonde stood motionless beside Mama Abena, overwhelmed by everything happening around her. Fear, confusion, hope, all of it, twisted painfully inside her chest. Mama Essie suddenly looked toward Temitope again. There's more you need to know. Madame Nkiru reacted instantly. No. The force behind the single word startled everyone. Temitope slowly turned toward her. You seem very determined to stop this conversation. Madame Nkiru realized her mistake immediately and softened her expression. I'm trying to protect you from manipulation. Mama Essie laughed weakly. Manipulation, she whispered. After all these years, Temitope's patience was disappearing quickly now. Someone explain what's happening. Mama Essie closed her eyes briefly before speaking. Years ago, when your sister disappeared, not everyone wanted her found. A cold silence filled the room. Temitope felt his entire body tense. What are you saying? The old woman pointed weakly toward Madame Nkiru. Her family was connected to the men controlling land disputes in Affola during that time. Madame Nkiru's face darkened immediately. You old fool. Temitope stared at her sharply. You knew my family before Lagos. She remained silent. That silence alone became an answer. Mama Isi continued carefully. After Zanele disappeared, rumors spread that a frightened young girl escaped the violence with help from villagers. Tears filled her eyes again. That girl later became known as Ayanda. Nomonde's breathing stopped for a second. My mother, Mama Essie, nodded slowly. She changed names to survive. Temitope felt dizzy beneath the weight of the revelation. Could it really be possible? Could Ayanda have been connected to Zanele? Or even worse, could Ayanda actually have been Zanele? The thought terrified him. Before anyone could speak further, Temitope's assistant hurried into the room carrying a phone. Sir, we found the financial records. Temitope looked toward him immediately. Explain. The assistant swallowed nervously. The bank transfers to Chinedu came from an account connected indirectly to one of Madame Nkiru's holding companies. The room exploded into shocked silence. Nomonde looked toward Madame Nkiru in disbelief. Even the police officers looked uncomfortable now. Madame Nkiru remained still for several seconds before laughing softly. You cannot seriously believe this proves anything. Temitope's expression turned ice cold. Why was my security guard receiving hidden payments connected to your company business transactions happen every day? Not usually after deleted footage and false theft accusations. The tension became unbearable. Chinadu suddenly appeared near the hallway entrance, pale with panic. "Madam," he whispered nervously. Madam Nkiru shot him a deadly look. Temitope noticed instantly. "Speak!" Chinadu looked trapped. Fear covered his face completely now. "I never meant for things to go this far," he stammered. Madam Nkiru stepped toward him sharply. "Be careful." But the guard had already reached breaking point. "She told me the ring only needed to disappear temporarily," he blurted out. The room fell silent again. Nomonde's eyes widened. Temitope stared at him with controlled fury. "Explain everything!" Chinadu's hands shook visibly. "She said confusion around the ring would pressure you during the upcoming family trust negotiations." Sweat rolled down his forehead. "I deleted the footage after the ring vanished near the entrance. And the theft accusation," Chinadu lowered his eyes. "She told me poor girls are easy to blame." Nomonde felt the words hit her like knives. Poor girls are easy to blame. Not because they were guilty, because nobody powerful cared enough to defend them. Madame Nkiru suddenly laughed bitterly. "So now everyone believes a frightened security guard over me?" Temitope stepped closer slowly. "You framed an innocent girl. She was convenient." The cruelty of the answer shocked even the police officers. Nomonde stared at Madame Nkiru in disbelief. Convenient. That was all her suffering meant to this woman. A convenient target. Tears filled Nomonde's eyes again, not from weakness this time, but from the painful realization that some people truly saw the poor as disposable. Mama Essie suddenly spoke again. "You framed the wrong girl." Madame Nkiru's eyes flashed dangerously. "You should have stayed silent and let another child suffer." Temitope turned sharply toward Mama Essie. "What child?" The old woman looked directly at Nomonde. Then finally, with trembling voice and tears running down her face, she revealed the truth she had carried for years. Ayanda was Zanele. The world seemed to stop. Nomonde froze completely. Temitope stared at her in shock so deep he could barely breathe. Madame Nkiru closed her eyes briefly, as though the secret finally escaping exhausted her. Mama Essie continued through tears. "Your sister survived the violence in Afola. Villagers hid her under another name because dangerous men were searching for surviving witnesses connected to the land conflicts." She pointed weakly toward Madame Nkiru. Her family feared what Zanele knew. Temitope felt years of grief crashing violently inside him. "My sister," he whispered. Mama Essie nodded slowly. "She became a Yenda to survive." Nomonde's legs nearly gave out beneath her. Her mother. Her entire life. Everything was changing. Then Mama Essie looked at Temitope one final time. "Nomonde is not a stranger to your family." Silence swallowed the room completely, and with tears filling his eyes for the first time in years, Temitope slowly turned toward the frightened orphan girl standing before him. His niece. Nobody in the room moved after Mama Essie revealed the truth. "Nomonde is not a stranger to your family." The words echoed through the mansion like something sacred and dangerous at the same time. Temitope stared at Nomonde in complete shock. His niece, the orphan girl accused of theft inside his showroom. The same girl who returned the family ring when she could have disappeared forever. Nomonde stood frozen beneath the weight of everything collapsing around her. Her mother, Zanele, the missing sister Temitope had searched for all these years. It felt impossible. Her legs weakened beneath her. Mama Abena quickly moved beside her and gently supported her arm. "Breathe, my child." Nomonde's eyes filled with tears. "My mother," she whispered shakily. "My mother was his sister." Mama Essie nodded slowly through tears. "Yes." Temitope looked as though years of grief had struck him all at once. His usually controlled expression had completely broken apart now. "She survived?" he asked quietly. Mama Essie lowered her head sadly. "For some years." The hope in Temitope's face dimmed immediately. Nomonde noticed it too. "How did she die?" she asked softly. Pain crossed Mama Essie's tired eyes. "She became sick after years of running and hiding." The old woman swallowed hard, but she never stopped loving the family she lost. Temitope closed his eyes briefly. All those years, all those searches, all those nights watching his mother cry herself to sleep. And somewhere during that time, Zanele had still been alive. Madame Nkiru suddenly spoke sharply. "You're all accepting the words of an unstable old woman without proof." The tension returned instantly. Temitope opened his eyes slowly and looked toward her. "Proof?" he repeated quietly. "Yes." Mama Essie stepped forward carefully. "There is proof." Everyone turned toward her again. The old woman reached slowly into the cloth bag hanging from her shoulder. Her trembling fingers pulled out a small folded fabric bundle tied with string. "I kept this hidden for many years." Temitope's breathing slowed. Mama Essie carefully opened the bundle. Inside rested an old silver pendant. The moment Temitope saw it, emotion shattered across his face. His mother's pendant, the same one Zanele wore as a child. He took it slowly with shaking hands. "I gave this to her myself," he whispered. Silence swallowed the room again. Madame Nkiru's calm expression finally cracked completely. "This proves nothing," she snapped. But nobody believed her anymore. Temitope looked up slowly. "You knew." The accusation landed heavily. Madame Nkiru folded her arms tightly. "I knew stories, rumors. You knew my sister survived. She disappeared during violent chaos. Many people disappeared. But you knew." The room felt colder now. The police officers remained silent near the doorway, no longer interested in arresting Nomonde. Even they understood something much larger than theft had unfolded. Mama Essie pointed weakly toward Madame Nkiru. Her father feared Zanele because she witnessed land agreements and illegal dealings connected to powerful men in Afola. Temitope's expression darkened dangerously. Madame Nkiru laughed bitterly. "You think exposing old village secrets changes anything?" "No," Temitope replied coldly. "Framing an innocent girl changes everything." For the first time, real fear flickered in Madame Nkiru's eyes. Not fear of prison, fear of losing power. Meanwhile, Nomonde stood completely overwhelmed. All her life she believed she belonged nowhere. No family, no protection, no future beyond survival. And now suddenly, the man standing before her, the billionaire she once feared even speaking to, was her uncle. It felt unreal. Temitope slowly walked toward her. Nomonde instinctively stepped back slightly. Not from hatred, from confusion. Everything was changing too fast. He stopped a short distance away, careful not to overwhelm her further. "You didn't know," he said quietly. Nomonde shook her head slowly. "My mother never told me." Temitope nodded faintly. "She probably wanted to protect you." The thought broke something inside Nomonde completely. All those years of poverty, all those nights hungry and alone. And somewhere beneath it all, her mother had been carrying terrible secrets while trying to survive. Tears rolled silently down Nomonde's face. Temitope noticed immediately. Then something unexpected happened. He lowered himself slowly to her eye level. Not like a billionaire, like family. "I'm sorry," he whispered. Nomonde looked at him in shock. "For what?" "For not finding you sooner." The sincerity in his voice shattered the last of her emotional control. She covered her mouth as sobs escaped her chest. Nobody had ever apologized for her suffering before. Not relatives, not employers, not the world. People usually treated poor girls as though hardship were simply their natural condition. Temitope stood slowly again and turned toward the police officers. "This girl will not face another accusation." The officers nodded immediately. "Yes, sir." Then his eyes moved toward Chinedu, and him. The frightened guard nearly collapsed under the pressure of Temitope's gaze. "I'm sorry," Chinedu whispered desperately. "I never wanted to hurt her." "But you did." Chinedu lowered his head completely. Temitope looked toward the officers again. "He will cooperate fully with investigators." "Yes, sir." Finally, Temitope faced Madame Nkiru. Silence stretched painfully between them. "You used my family's pain," he said quietly. Madame Nkiru lifted her chin stubbornly. "Your family built wealth from the same corrupt systems." "Maybe," Temitope admitted calmly, "but we did not destroy innocent people to protect ourselves." Her face hardened completely now. "You think kindness makes you different from the rest of us?" "No," Temitope replied. "But cruelty certainly makes you different from her." He looked toward Nomonde. The poor orphan girl she tried to destroy. The girl who returned the ring anyway. Madame Nkiru followed his gaze and laughed bitterly. "One honest act, and suddenly she becomes royalty." "No," Temitope answered softly. "One honest act revealed she already had dignity before any of us noticed." The room fell silent again. Mama Essie smiled weakly through tears. For the first time in years, truth had finally survived long enough to be heard. Temitope slowly picked up the diamond ring from the table. The same ring that caused humiliation lies fear and buried secrets to rise into the light. Then he walked toward Nomonde carefully. She looked at the ring nervously. "You should keep it," she whispered. "It belongs to your family." Temitope's eyes softened. "It belongs to you too." Gently he placed the velvet box into her trembling hands. Not as charity, not as payment, as belonging. Nomonde stared down at it while tears rolled silently across her cheeks. For the first time since childhood, she no longer felt completely alone in the world. Outside the mansion windows, Lagos continued moving beneath the evening lights. Crowded streets shouting traitors, endless survival. But inside the quiet room, something powerful had finally happened. Truth defeated shame. And a poor orphan girl once called a thief had just reclaimed not only her innocence, but her family. 3 months later, Lagos still remembered the story. Not because of the diamond ring, not because of the billionaire. People remembered because a poor orphan girl had walked into a luxury showroom wearing torn clothes and left with her dignity restored in front of everyone who once called her a thief. The news spread quickly after the investigation became public. Deleted security footage, false accusations, hidden payments. Madame Nkiru's connection to the scheme destroyed her reputation completely. Chinedu cooperated with investigators in exchange for reduced charges, revealing everything he knew about the manipulated theft accusation and the attempts to frame Nomonde. But for Temitope Adewale, none of that mattered as much as the truth he had finally discovered too late. His sister had survived. Zanele had lived. And she had died carrying loneliness instead of family. That pain stayed inside him every day. One quiet evening, Temitope stood alone on the balcony of the Ikoyi mansion, watching Lagos lights shimmer beneath the dark sky. Behind him, soft footsteps approached. Nomonde. She no longer looked like the frightened girl who entered Victoria Plaza weeks earlier. The exhaustion remained in some parts of her eyes, but healing had begun touching her slowly. Not because of money, because for the first time in years, she no longer felt invisible. "You're thinking again," she said softly. Temitope smiled faintly without turning around. "I do that too much." Nomonde stepped beside him quietly. The city stretched endlessly before them. "You miss her," she whispered. Temitope finally looked at her. "Every day." Nomonde nodded slowly. "Me too." For several moments, silence settled gently between them. It no longer felt uncomfortable. That was the strange thing about healing. Sometimes it arrived quietly, without dramatic moments. Just two wounded people standing beside each other, finally no longer alone. Temitope reached into his pocket slowly. The diamond ring rested inside the velvet box again. Nomonde noticed immediately. "You still carry it everywhere. It reminds me of promises." He opened the box carefully. The diamond reflected soft light beneath the night sky. For years, Temitope said quietly, "I believe this ring represented failure." Nomonde looked at him silently. "I gave it to myself as punishment," he continued. "A reminder that I failed to protect my sister. But you found me." Pain crossed his face briefly. "Too late for her." Nomonde lowered her eyes. "My mother never blamed you." Temitope looked surprised. "She talked about you sometimes," Nomonde admitted softly. "Not often, but when she did, she always said her brother loved her." Emotion tightened sharply inside his chest. "She said that." Nomonde nodded. "She told me family is not measured by absence." Tears gathered in her eyes again. "She said sometimes people lose each other because the world becomes cruel, not because love disappears." Temitope looked away toward the city lights before emotion fully reached his face. For years, grief had lived inside him like locked stone. Now Nomonde's presence cracked it open slowly. "She would have been proud of you," he whispered. Nomonde laughed softly through tears. "She would probably ask why I still walk too fast everywhere." That small sentence made both of them smile painfully. Then Temitope gently closed the velvet box and placed it into Nomonde's hands once more. She looked startled. Uncle, keep it. I can't. Yes, you can. Nomonde shook her head immediately. It belongs to your family. Temitope's voice softened. You are my family. The words struck her deeply. All her life belonging had always felt temporary, fragile, conditional. But now someone finally spoke the word family without hesitation. Tears slipped silently down her face. Temitope continued carefully. This ring spent years carrying sorrow. He looked toward her warmly. I want it to carry hope now. Nomonde stared down at the diamond through blurred vision. Not long ago, she almost sold it to escape poverty. Now it meant something entirely different. Healing, truth, home. Inside the mansion, Mama Abena and Mama Essie watched quietly from the doorway. Mama Essie's health had weakened further during recent weeks, but peace now rested gently across her tired face. The secret she carried for years had finally been released. She looks like Zanelli when she smiles, Mama Essie whispered. Mama Abena nodded softly. Yes. Back on the balcony, Nomonde carefully closed the velvet box. Can I ask you something? Temitope smiled faintly. You usually do anyway. She laughed softly. Why did you believe me that day in the showroom? He became quiet for a moment, then finally answered honestly. Because guilty people usually protect themselves first. His eyes softened. But even while crying, you were still trying to protect your conscience. Nomonde lowered her gaze shyly. Temitope continued, and because you returned something valuable while the world had given you almost nothing, the truth of those words settled deeply between them. Far below Lagos, continued moving through another restless night. Buses crowded the roads. Market traders packed their stalls. Children chased each other through narrow streets, while tired workers hurried home beneath flickering lights. Somewhere inside that enormous city, countless poor people were still being judged before being heard. Still being blamed because suffering made them easy targets. But not tonight. Not for Nomonde. The orphan girl who once slept hungry behind a market stall now stood beneath the night sky holding the symbol of a family finally restored. Not restored perfectly. Pain still existed. Loss still remained. But love had survived long enough to find its way back. Temitope placed one gentle hand on her shoulder. You'll never walk through this world alone again. Nomonde looked up at him slowly. For the first time in years, she believed those words completely. And somewhere deep inside her heart, the frightened little girl who spent years surviving alone finally allowed herself to rest. After years of pain, rejection, and silence, Nomonde's story reminds us of something many people forget too easily. Poverty is not proof of dishonesty, and wealth is not proof of goodness. Too often the world judges struggling people before hearing their truth. But kindness, integrity, and dignity can survive even in the hardest lives. Nomonde could have sold the ring. Nobody would have blamed her hunger. Yet she chose honesty when life gave her every reason not to. And in the end, that single decision uncovered hidden truths, healed a broken family, and restored the dignity people tried to steal from her. Sometimes the greatest miracle is not becoming rich. Sometimes it is finally being seen, believed, and loved after years of feeling invisible. If this story touched your heart, tell us where you're watching from and what lesson stayed with you the most. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and share this story with someone who still believes kindness has power.